the main insights of the topic I spoke about at this conference was really focused on not so much the innovation ideas and technologies, because there's an abundance of technology here. I thought it would be important to actually share a little bit more about how to execute for business value. So I've had about 20 to 30 years of doing digital transformations in large corporations, Fortune 100 companies, working with the executive teams, as well as startups. And I've come to the conclusion that ideas are easy, but execution is actually hard. And statistically speaking, if you look at the last decade from 2010 to 2020, 72% of digital transformation projects have failed. That's a statistic reported by the industry. That's referenced in Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Fortune, Gartner, McKinsey, etc. So I've lived through that period. I was part of those successes as I was part of those failures. I think it's very important, especially when you have a conference like this talking about all this food technology and innovation. You know, artificial intelligence, there's robotics, there's 3D printing over here, there's blockchain, there's all this innovation, all these ideas. Ideas are easy, execution is hard. 72% of projects in the last 10 years have failed, reported by the industry around digital transformation. So my talk was about why they failed. And the data shows, and it's referenced, that it was not a technical issue, it was a behavioral science challenge. It was a behavioral issue, it was change management. It was organizations that think very linear, trying to adopt a very exponential, disruptive capability, and how challenging that actually is. So my talk was specifically about what are those cultural and behavioral barriers and challenges, and then how do you deal with them? From a very pragmatic standpoint, what have successful companies done different than the companies that have failed in order to prevent this behavioral challenge around change management? So that was the premise for the discussion I had that I presented about here. A little bit of the highlight, you can watch the recording of the session, but a little bit of the highlight was this notion that your core organization has antibodies that smother innovation. Okay, so if you're a big corporate traditional food company or you're a food startup company, doesn't matter. Your core business, your marketing department, your logistics, your supply chain, your finance, your core functionality has antibodies that smother disruptive innovation. It's very difficult to innovate using your core organization. So what I shared was this notion that has been proven by many organizations through case studies and the empirical data that shows that if you look at building an edge team or edge organization around your core, but keep it outside of the core antibodies, that edge organization, under a different set of rules and parameters and processes and metrics, should take on that disruptive innovation. And then as that edge play demonstrates some success, rather than pulling that success back into the core, which is usually the tendency of the organization to do that once the success happens from this edge organization, they start to feel disrupted in the core. So they pull the edge back into the core thinking, okay, we're having some success, let's put it back into the core where all the muscle is. And that's the mistake that most organizations make. And the reality is that you have to have a premeditated strategy where the edge organization starts to disrupt the core, but even the core's tendency to pull it back into the core, the edge into the core, the edge actually pulls the core out to the edges and your edge becomes your new core one day. It evolves. It's really the evolution of an organization. I know it sounds a little theoretical. I mean, the talk, I gave some pragmatic examples, but it's just this notion that it's very difficult to do innovation from your core because there's antibodies. And most people that have been around in organizations, they see this firsthand with the core smothering the innovation. The other thing I shared was it shouldn't be a secretive exercise. It should be very transparent, meaning an executive in an organization should share with the rest of the organization that as an organization, we have been evolving very linear, but we have to start thinking exponentially. And we don't think we can do that while we also manage our core traditional business. So we are going to have a premeditated strategy where we're going to develop this edge organization to actually focus on some of this innovation and then bring that back so that the core can evolve itself to this new edge organization and become our new core. And the executives should share that as a strategy so that the core doesn't get jealous of the edge, right? So the core is receptive to this strategy, basically sharing with the organization that this is our survival strategy. It's a disrupt yourself before you're disrupted strategy. My talk I gave was Uber yourself before you get Kodak'd. So it's that notion of how do you do that, because that's the hard part, right? So that's what we discussed. So I think that the future of food, I think, is probably at a major inflection point, because you saw COVID disrupt supply chains so much, you realize the global food supply chain was really somewhat precarious. And I think what you're going to find out is you're going to get to these localized food models, kind of what you see in a company here. One of the companies here is called Blend Hub, which is a localized food model, which is how do we start creating factories that maybe a company like Kellogg's or Unilever or Nestle had for millions and millions of dollars. Is it feasible that today, because of new technologies like AI and 3D printing and biotech, that some of that technology can be democratized to where now, for a minimal investment, maybe $1 million versus $100 million, you can actually build a factory, just like a big consumer product company had. And you can make those factories local around the environment where there's abundance of natural resources, so that the local community participates more in the jobs and the economy of that factory. But also you're not taking the farming product and shipping it across the world, getting it processed, lacking some nutrition, and shipping it all the way back. So you get to this more localized food economy. And I think that's a trend that we're going to start to see in food in a big way. Why? Because you're starting to see a lot of issues with tracing and tracking food. Is it really organic or is it not organic? Is it using slave labor? Does it have fair practices of animals and et cetera? It's too difficult to track, so consumers will start to demand more transparency, and they'll also want to see more local food production with local economy where the farmers, the workers, the truckers are all local jobs and the manufacturing process is local. So that way they have transparency in terms of where their food's coming from. Also, the local economy's flourishing more versus shipping it back somewhere overseas to benefit some other economy. So I think that's a big trend you're going to see. Why? Because more risk in the food chain as it gets, because of COVID and things, and it gets shut down, so people want it more localized, and two, or simplified, and two, because the price of running a factory to process food in a nutritional way is actually something that has been democratized to where now you can build a factory in a farming community with the same or more sophisticated capabilities as some of the best food companies in the world, with still keeping the nutritional value as well. So in terms of coming to a summit, this is the first summit I've been to since COVID. You know, I'm based in California, so to come all the way out here to Spain, I think the group did a great job of taking all the precautions. You know, the new normal, walking around with masks, very good safety precautions taken here at the summit. I think it's good to visit in person with people again. I do think that I've been doing a lot of programs in virtual reality in the last year, which is a new arising trend that is very feasible. You can have a summit like this in complete virtual reality, and it's very effective. I've been doing quite a few of these and building these environments. But you need to balance that with also some in-person interaction in which people get together. So I think this is great. I think this is a great part of the world to have this FoodTech Summit here in the northern part of Spain.